Hi, and welcome to this lesson on pen and charcoal. Now, most of you know me as a watercolourist by heart, and I love to paint in a loose and expressionistic way. What I like to do is to produce charcoal preliminary sketches, and these ideas in charcoal have really helped me to become a loose expressionistic painter. Charcoal allows me to be more expressive. What I mean by that is it's kind of instant, and I can produce lovely kind of values, from light values, mid values to dark values, and also I can produce some beautiful linear marks, and sometimes I use an eraser to lift out the marks as well. And I do this a lot when I'm painting on site or working from a photograph. Now, I admit that charcoal is a little messy on the hands, but believe me, I think it's well worth it, and I truly believe that working in this method has really helped me to become a much looser watercolourist. Let's have a look at the materials we're going to use today. What I've got here is some willow charcoal, and really these are just sticks of very soft charcoal. There's a little tiny piece, and that's quite a good tip as well. Don't tend to use the longer pieces like this. It's much easier if you break them into small pieces, and we can make some kind of lovely soft values with the charcoal. I'm also going to be using a fine liner pen, so it's a bit like a line and wash, a charcoal and wash, and I'm going to be using an eraser. And that's going to help me to lift out the values. Let me give you a small example. We'll do a little warm-up first. So what could we do? We could do something very simple. And the techniques I'm going to show you here are really the techniques that we're going to use during this demonstration. So this is very, very simple. We'll just take an apple shape for now. We'll put a little highlight on and maybe a shadow. I'll just reinforce that line. Quite simple. Let's take our piece of charcoal. You can see my hands are a little messy already. Let's take the charcoal. It's almost like a watercolour wash. I like to think of it as a watercolour wash. That's my first wash with the charcoal. And I can use my fingers, or I can use a rag, and I can kind of soften that down, blend that back into the paper. The paper, by the way, I'm going to be using today is a 220 gram. I think it's best, really, if you don't use a paper that's too smooth. Something with a bit of tooth helps. This is 220 gram, and that's got a little bit of tooth to it. So we've kind of put this lovely light value down now, and I'd like a highlight in that, but I'm going to lift that out at the end. So I'm going to take my charcoal on its side, and we'll put a bit more value into the apple. So that's a positive value. I can take the pressure off and blend that with my finger, like so. A little bit more dark here. We'll add a shadow. And again, using the charcoal on its side. So you shouldn't be afraid of charcoal, because you can make lots of mistakes and you can just lift them out. Okay. Already it's beginning to take a 3D appearance. During the next exercise, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about counter change, and that means putting a dark value against a light. So what I'd like to do here is I'd like to put this darker value here against the light of the apple. And we'll rub that down, and that really helps, doesn't it, to give you that lovely light effect. The counter change, the light against the dark. And you can keep building and building your drawing up. I don't want to spend too long on this. I'm sure you want to get stuck into the demonstration. Let's take a little bit of our eraser. Now, it's a kneadable eraser, and that means that I can move it around and twist it about, so I can create nice little points for that. And I can lift out value, and I can soften it with my finger. In fact, I could kind of run, if you notice, like I can run value through any of the dark areas, and then I can lose them again. So it's quite versatile. So hopefully that little warm-up has given you an idea of how we're going to progress with the next demonstration. This is the reference photograph that I'd like to use today. This little cottage caught my eye a few weeks ago when I was in Yorkshire, and as usual on site, I didn't really have a lot of time to paint it. I've been painting all day, so I want to show you today the type of preliminary sketch that I would do on site of this type of subject. There's also another reason for producing preliminary sketches, or what they are ideas. What I mean by that is that this picture isn't perfect. It's a beautiful picture, but it isn't perfect, and there are changes that I'd like to make. And if I produce a charcoal and pen sketch, that means I can make the changes that I need. So shall we get started? Here I've got a black fine liner pen. Now, it doesn't have to be waterproof for this. I'm going to move my reference photograph to one side, and I'm going to start to draw with the pen. Now, if you're a little bit nervous, then you could put some pencil lines down first, and there's nothing wrong with that. Just make sure that you don't put lots of detail in there, just basic lines, and then you can use your pen. So let's get started. Now, you can see from my photograph that I'm a terrible photographer, and I missed the top off of the building, and I'd like to include that. I'd also like to include the distant hill, and that's going to be mainly loose charcoal, I'll call them washes, charcoal washes, and I can see bits of sky, but I don't want to include that. So I'm thinking all the time about the planning stage of this picture. I've also changed the format as well. We've gone from landscape to portrait. So let's get started, and we'll start to draw in the top of this roof here. Again, don't worry if you're not confident enough, you can always put some pencil lines down first. Another thing I'm going to do, can you see there's another little building in the background at the side of this house, and I don't feel that it adds to the composition at all, so I'm going to eliminate it from my picture because I can. I'll put some little windows in here. And you can see I'm trying to keep the drawing very kind of loose. And all the time I'm thinking about how this would look in watercolour. We've got another roof shape here that kind of comes across something like this. Very loose lines. We'll start to add some foliage, so I'm linking the straight lines of the roof with the foliage shapes. We'll put in some branches and some shapes here that would represent foliage. There's a lovely little window in that porch. I'd like to include that. Bit of measuring now. I love the dry stone wall here, and if I lay my pen on the picture, I can kind of see that it's kind of sloping away, something like that. Very loose, connecting the foliage here. There's some lovely little posts kind of jutting out from behind the wall. There's also some nice shrubs and trees in the distance, and they're just basically circular shapes like this. I have a few more, not too many. I don't want to take them all the way up to the top here, because we're going to soften the charcoal off like we do with the watercolour washes, soften them away. Let's look at the foliage shapes here and the flowers and the plants in front of the building. So they kind of come in front of this shape. Again, you can keep your drawing nice and loose at this stage, because really it is a preliminary sketch, so don't get too worked up about it. Let's look at the shape of the wall as it comes across here. So what I like to do is draw some basic lines first. Foliage across the top, and the wall kind of comes up something like that. I can always go back in and put the detail later, but these lines are really important. Okay, more foliage. I've got a little step there as well, some grass shapes. And again, this wall shape kind of goes back, something like that. Once I've got all these shapes in and I'm happy with them, here's the top of the wall, I'll then start to add more value. We'll do some cross-hatching, and we've covered that before again with the line and wash demo we did of the Isle of Man, so hopefully you're familiar with that. There's some tops of the wall showing here as well. You see little bits of it, and then the foliage comes right across the top. And really, once I've got this bottom line in here, I'm just kind of following that line with the shapes of the stones. We'll put some smaller ones in, some bigger ones, baby ones. Keep them as a single line for now. And we can go back to them later and add a bit more detail. I can see this little chimney here, just peeking across the top of the roof. And we've also got a lovely old drain pipe that comes down, something like that. So once you're happy with your linear marks, you can then start to think about value. Now, to think about value, we need to know where the light's coming from. And it isn't really clear on this photograph, but a good way of looking for value is to really screw your eyes up. Now, I know it's not a good look, but it does help. So if I screw my eyes up and I look at this photograph, I can see that the light's coming from the right-hand side. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to exaggerate that. I'm going to use my pen and I'm going to put some linear marks into the side of this building here. Under the eaves is quite dark as well, and it certainly is here. And we'll introduce charcoal to this area, but it's nice to have those linear marks to describe that shadow. Let's be brave, and we'll put the shadow right across the side of this little porch area. Let's come back here and let's think about the shrubs. If the light's coming from the right-hand side, that means that the left-hand side of the shrubs is slightly darker. And that's something that we really need, because here we have a counter change, a light against a dark. So the dark value works really well against the porch area. So that's going to really show off the light. So that's quite handy. Let's work a little bit on the wall. Light's coming from the right-hand side. So all I'm going to do is put some darker shadows against the left of these little stones. And I don't want to make too much of a fuss of this area because it's kind of going out of the picture. So we'll keep it nice and loose. And this method that we're using, this charcoal and line, is perfect for keeping things nice and loose. Little bit of detail onto this roof, and what I mean by that is just a few lines. There you go, done. Moving slightly over to this side. This is an interesting area here, because what I'd like to do is to exaggerate the lights of the foliage and the flowers. So really I need to make this quite a dark area. And on the reference photograph it isn't that dark, but this is a change that I'm making for the better. So we'll start to crosshatch into that, and I'll make sure that I don't touch the tops of those little flowers. Okay, working our way down now. We're thinking about things in its simplest of terms, looking at where the lights are and where the darks are. So here I have a light area of foliage, flowers, and I'm just simply going to scribble a darker value against them, and that hopefully will look as though we've got lots of plants growing here. Okay, lovely plants growing over the top here, so I'll definitely put in some darker marks on the tops of those, remembering not to touch this area. This is the area that I want to keep kind of light. I mean, these lines are kind of stalks to the flowers, aren't they? So we can be a little bit wild with those. Here I've got daisy shapes and a wall. So I'd like to show the light of the wall, so I'll definitely make sure that I put some stronger value against the top of that wall. Show it off. Let's introduce more branch shapes. Now this tree doesn't come as far out, but I'd like it to in my picture. And here really you can just scribble. It might look messy now, but once the charcoal's over that, it's going to look great. Light's coming from the right hand side, so let's look at these areas here, the plants growing over the wall. Really keep it simple. Think light coming from the right, touching the top of this shape. So we'll make it darker underneath. And let's put another one next to it here. And I'd just like a little bit more work into the stone area now. I want to kind of show off the bottoms of these stones. So I'll just put a stronger value underneath them. And then in between the little cracks here, where I've drawn these linear marks, I'm just going to make the lines a little bit thicker. I don't want to include too much foreground detail, but I'd like to include some little stones and shapes. So these are just squiggles with my pen. And I'll reinforce those lines here. Let's take you somewhere through the picture. Perhaps darken the bottom here. I think we're nearly done. I'm impatient. I can't wait to put the charcoal on. But make sure your drawing's ready first, because unlike a line and wash with watercolour, you can't really go back in with the pen once the charcoal's down. So it's better to get all the marks down first. Yes, I think it's time that I put my pen away and started to put the charcoal values in there, charcoal washes. So here we go. Using the charcoal on its side, let's imagine this area here. So we can use it on its side and kind of blend in with our finger. We could take that charcoal wash really all the way up to the top. So we're just blending this back. So we're creating a tone. And I'm pressing quite hard into the paper. Now let's imagine that we've got more kind of trees and bushes going on here. So I'm thinking about the light at this stage as well. So my pen lines, I can go around them. And all I'm going to do is soften off. And you hear me talking a lot about softening off when we use watercolour. And this is a very similar technique. I'm putting a value down. And I'm using my finger or the rag to soften that back. So it becomes a very subtle value, but the softening off works quite well because we're blending that back into the dark or mid-tone of the background. Thinking about the light again, so we'll have a darker value here and we're counter-changing, putting that light against the dark from the shrubs to the building. You really don't have to be too careful here. Again, putting the value in and the softening off, so pulling that value away, pushing it up. So we're getting a very subtle pattern of dark, light and dark. Let's put a little bit here. This is quite dark here, and it allows me again to go around the little post shapes and up against the wall, the top of the wall, pulling that value across. Being kind of careful that I don't want to touch the tops of that, but if I do, I've got my eraser. A little bit more dark here, I think. And I'm sure you'll agree now that that really does look effective. It almost looks like the light's catching the tops of these shrubs. I try not to labour on it like I would with my painting. But again, sometimes I can't help it. But I want it to be nice and loose, so I'll leave that at that stage and perhaps come back to it later if I feel I need a little bit more detail. I think what's important to note is it's best to work from the top of your paper and work down. If we start to include too much detail here, what tends to happen is if you're leaning on your paper, most of your drawing ends up on your arm, and that's something we don't want. So we start working from the top to bottom, and then if need be, if I need to lean on my paper at any point, I can put a piece of paper and lean on it like that. We'll probably do that a little bit later on. So now we're looking for values in the building. Again, I can use the side of the charcoal, Rub that down with my finger. Now, I want this value to be darker than this value. That's not necessarily true on the photograph, but for this piece of work, that's how I want it to look. See, I've gone over my drain pipe there, but it doesn't matter. I've got my eraser. See, I might need to do this now. I've got a little bit of paper here, so I've got a little bit more control here now. Again, softening. So you're still getting to see those lovely hatch marks with the pen underneath the charcoal. We'll bring that value quite dark here now. I want to exploit it really. I want to exploit it because I want to show off the light of the front of the building. We'll put a little bit of a shadow just underneath that eave as well. And really, I don't really need a lot of detail in the windows because the pen's doing that for me. I think we'd better put some of the tree in. If I come down here, I'm liable to rub it away. So this is really easy because the pen lines are already there. So we'll just smudge in some darker areas, maybe reinforce some of the lines that I've already got. So you can see I'm not really following the lines as such. I'm breaking the lines with the value. Smudging it around. See what I mean about it being kind of spontaneous and expressive. It's a joy to work with and not too messy. Let's come back here. Let's make a change. Let's make this dark value of the building against a lighter value here. And remembering to keep those flowers a nice light colour. It's starting to take shape now and it's nearly finished, and I really enjoy working in this way, whether I'm on site or whether I'm working from a photograph. I find it quite satisfying. And it's a great plan then, isn't it, for a watercolour? I wouldn't actually use the reference photograph. I'd use my drawing to work from. I think we'll put a little bit of value onto the roof of the porch here, but I'll soften it. So I'll put the darker value to the left and just pull it across. Look how effective these areas are now, these lights against these darks. We'll put some value down here and perhaps underneath a little wall here. We need to make kind of separations, so here I'm going to put a darker value kind of in and out of these flower shapes and push that up. Don't worry if you lose some of your lights, we can go back to them. A bit more over this side. Let's work up against the top of the dry stone wall. So I'd like this to be quite dark. Trying not to paint around over my daisies, but they'll still kind of show through. I'm also pulling value. You notice I'm pulling value into this area as well, kind of smudging it about, so everything's got a connection. Okay, let's put these shadows in underneath the plants that are growing across the wall. So again, I'm using the mid value, pushing that down over the wall, and we'll put some little shadows underneath the tops of the stones, and again pulling them down, almost following the line really that I put in with the pen. Let's include some of the shadow areas over the lines we've put into the dry stone wall, and really I'm just kind of very roughly using the point of the charcoal to put those in, and then I'm going to smudge them down a little bit with my finger. let's put some charcoal washes into this foreground. And I'm very much using this larger piece like I did here, just to give it a nice soft blend of value. We're doing the same thing here. We'll make that a little bit dark. Kind of connecting value as well. Ooh, a little bit more. You can keep building and building, and if you don't like it, you can take it away again. I'm going to darken that a little bit as well. That's better. Nice balance. I think it's time to start to lift out some value with my eraser. And remember, it's a kneadable eraser, so what I've done is I've broken a piece off. I can always attach it back later, but that little piece is great because that allows me to kind of pull it into nice shapes. So I'd like to clean this bit of the building here, and perhaps a little bit of that. We could even lift some little highlights out of the tree shapes. You can keep going forever. That drain pipe could do with a little bit of lifting as well. I'll just lift a few little highlights. I think we're nearly finished. Just a little bit of work into the foreground now. I'd like to deepen some of these lines. Perhaps make it a little bit darker at the bottom of the wall. How about some stone shapes? That would be nice, wouldn't it? Thinking about the direction of light. So if the light's coming from the right-hand side, I've got a little shape here, and we'll just pop a little shadow underneath it. Maybe there's another one here, just to give it a bit of movement and a bit of interest in that foreground. But yeah, I think I want to stop at that stage because for me it's a great piece of work, but it's also a great starting point for a painting. I've talked a lot about watercolour painting while I've been producing this charcoal sketch, so I thought it was only fair to show you a watercolour painting from a sketch like this. Okay, so here we have a line and wash. Now it's just in one colour, but what I'm trying to show you here is I couldn't have produced this without that initial idea, that sketch, that study, the charcoal and line. So we've gone from this, which is a great picture, but not a great composition, to this, which is a great piece of work in its own right. But what it's enabled me to do is to produce a watercolour with the changes that I had in mind, and all I've had to do is to look at the values that I produced with the charcoal sketch. I really hope you've enjoyed that and it's inspired you to have a go. So dig out your charcoals and a pen and find some photographs, or even get out on site and have a go. I'm sure you'll really enjoy it. Thanks for watching.